channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to see more content from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I'll post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics in astrology and also tarot. Please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there, and you can email me for more details on pricings and so on. And also, if you are interested in tarot, I have also started a tarot channel more recently, and I'm going to be linking the link to that channel in the video description. If you are interested in tarot, go check it out. Maybe subscribe if you like the content. Thank you. So today's video is going to be in continuation with the series that I started quite a while ago on reading the partner dispositors through nakshatras. And today's video is going to be on the Jupiter-ruled nakshatras, which are Punarvasu, Vishakha, and Purva Bhadrapada. The next video that I'm going to be doing in this series is the Saturn-ruled nakshatra, and of course, as usual, please be patient with me because it will take some time. I can't promise to deliver it by a certain date. That being said, also I would recommend that if you don't know how to check the nakshatras that are relevant for you, I have made a video specifically on this topic, how to see the nakshatras that are the most relevant in describing your future spouse or your potential partner, your partner archetype, and I will be linking that video in the video description as well for this video. And aside from that, also, as I have mentioned with every other video in this series, you can, of course, use these descriptions to understand yourself better if you have placements in these nakshatras. Okay, so that being said, the first part of the video is about describing what these nakshatras have in common and what separates them, as far as I have seen. So, Jupiter. What does Jupiter stand for? Jupiter stands for higher education, philosophy, belief systems, sense of adventure. What else? Optimism, faith. I think I mentioned faith, belief systems, higher philosophy, higher learning, the higher educational systems. Also stands for travel, foreign travel, especially anything that has to do with broadening your horizons, with expanding your view of the world, basically everything to do with growth and cultivating yourself, especially on a spiritual level, is basically ruled by Jupiter. That being said, this means that these nakshatras, all of them, are very focused on education, on learning, in various ways. Okay, there are differences, and I'm going to get to the differences especially when I tackle each nakshatra separately. But first of all, I wanted to say that these nakshatras, all of them, care a great deal about higher education, continuously growing, especially on an intellectual plane. They are connected to basically things like reading, like traveling, dealing with also people of different cultures, because that also deals with expanding your horizons to a large extent. And so these are the things that they have in common. I'm starting with the easy part. On top of that, all of these nakshatras, Jupiter is, well, in Roman mythology, it was the father of the gods, corresponding to Zeus, the Greek god, which was also the father of the gods. And basically, this is a very masculine energy. So all of these nakshatras basically have that in common, so to speak, in the sense that they are very much focused on expansion. They're focused on outwardly expressing their energy. That's basically what masculine means on an energetic plane mainly. And because of this, they have a certain restlessness, they have a certain even aggression, especially with Vishakha and Purva Bhadrapada, not so much with Punarvasu. But they will have these common traits of, sometimes over-optimism and definitely restlessness, and also to some extent a tendency to be a little bit scattered, at least some of the time. And needless to say, because this is a masculine nakshatra, it will be a little bit more, well, these are masculine nakshatras. I'm not talking about any one in particular, but all of them really, to some extent, will be more difficult for women than they are for men. In a woman's chart, they will show that the woman will struggle a little bit to find her place in the world, her niche, depending on the society that she lives in, of course. But I would say that even in the most, let's say, open-minded Western cultures, that women with a lot of these nakshatra energies, these Jupiterian energies, will have more challenges, definitely more challenges than a man with the same placements in finding their place in the world, in being fulfilled on every plane, spiritually and biologically, as women. Okay, so that is something that I wanted to say right off the bat, and I would say that this is especially true with the women of Purva Bhadrapada, and I will get more into details as I progress. Okay, that being said, because this is a masculine, so speaking also a little bit on the gender differences and potential differences that you could arise, that you could notice based on different gender perspectives, you would think that because these nakshatras are very masculine in nature, that basically the men who come from or who have a lot of energies pertaining to these nakshatras are going to be more chauvinistic than average. I think it's a natural assumption to be made, which I would say to some extent it is true, and I would say especially for Vishakha nakshatra, as far as I have noticed. Contrary to the popular belief, I think people who study these nakshatras in depth would probably take Purva Bhadrapada as the number one suspect, but in my experience, I've actually noticed that it's the Vishakha natives, especially the male natives of Vishakha, that tend to be, not necessarily like raging women haters, but they will tend to be, I would say, quite traditionalist and even borderline chauvinistic. And it is one of those things that I could talk about probably for a long time, but to put it really in the most short and blunt manner, I think the reason this happens is because Vishakha is particularly competitive, and basically, like every hyper-competitive individual, they would favor a traditionalist society, because that basically means that roughly half the population is out of the game, right? Because in a purely traditionalist society, women could never compete with men for a job, let's say. That might be, to some people, I don't know, maybe that to some of you will sound like an oversimplification, but based on my observations, I would be willing to bet on this, to be honest. It's dealing with a lot of, not dealing directly so much with a lot, but I have had tangencies with different people who I know have placements in Vishakha, and yeah, there seems to be a lot of competitiveness and a lot of envy connected to this nakshatra, and also a lot of traditional views, especially with respect to gender roles. And you can also see that in the examples that I will put in the video when I get to the Vishakha segment of this video. So that's something that I wanted to say as an introduction. What I also wanted to say, actually, is that I found it interesting that in Hinduism, Indra, which is the deity connected to Vishakha, and to some extent connected to, actually not so much. Yeah, it's mainly connected to Vishakha, but also in Purva Bhadrapada there are similar themes, and that's what I was going for, that these nakshatras especially are connected to themes of thunderstorms and lightnings, very, very frightening. Galileo, I'm kidding. But you know what I mean. So I find it quite interesting because Jupiter also in the Roman mythology was connected to lightnings, mainly lightnings, thunderstorms, also symbolized by vultures sometimes, so that's like an air element there. But yeah, that's something that I also found interesting because it's an interesting parallel. However, this is just for Vishakha and for Bhadrapada. There is some connection to electricity as an element, as a natural element. Not so much Punarvasu, even though Punarvasu is also a Jupiter-ruled nakshatra. It is the more gentle cousin. Okay. Yeah, but that's something I wanted to say as an introduction in general about all of these. And now let me get more in depth. So the first nakshatra, if you're gonna hear like ruffling of papers and stuff, it's because I made notes. I'm very old-fashioned. And yeah, so the first one, Punarvasu, spans from sidereal 20 degrees Gemini to 3 degrees 20 minutes Cancer. So in sidereal zodiac, in tropical zodiac, it spans from 13 degrees 46 minutes to 27 degrees 6 minutes of Cancer. So basically in sidereal, it mostly spans from Gemini to Cancer. So the first 3 padhas or subdivisions are in Gemini. The last one is in Cancer. I won't be getting too in depth and talking about each padha, to be honest, because I'm more interested in the overall energy and, you know, symbolisms and vibes and things associated with this nakshatra in general. Okay, the translation for Punarvasu is literally good again or wealthy again, also called the star of renewal. So there is a connection between this nakshatra and the idea of regeneration, of repetition, everything that has a re something in front of it could be potentially connected to this nakshatra, or could have something to do with the general energy and the themes of this nakshatra. But let me continue with the general characteristics. So also the symbol associated with this nakshatra is a bow and quiver of arrows. So there's a little bit of a connection here. Well, not exactly, but it's a similar symbolism, to Sagittarius, but it's not the same thing. However, it is an interesting comparison to bear in mind, considering that this is also a Jupiter-ruled nakshatra, and Sagittarius is also ruled by Jupiter, so I find that a little bit interesting. But carrying on, just hold that thought. The animal yoni is, or the yoni animal is the female cat. Once again, I have mentioned this before in previous videos. So the yoni basically is an animal associated. So each nakshatra has an animal associated with it, and it shows the primal nature of that particular nakshatra, or like the instinctive nature. And as I have mentioned in previous videos, I do think that these animals are very suggestive. So I think it definitely helps for anyone to think about the animal, the nature of the animal, what are some of the characteristics typically associated with this animal, and the general energy that is associated with this animal when you try to analyze the people that have this nakshatra very prominently represented in their horoscopes. But again, I'm going to get more into that as I progress. The ruling, the nature or the gana is Deva. I also mentioned this in previous videos. The nature or the ganas are divided into 3 categories. They are Deva, Manushya, and Rakshasa. And the Punarvasu are Deva or godlike. So this means that they are basically pretty elevated, pretty soft in nature, so they're not going to be very aggressive. And they're also quite spiritual and, spiritual, patient, generally soft in nature, okay? So they're not going to be, super aggressive. The gender of the nakshatra is male, so the gender is separate from the yoni of the nakshatra. So the yoni is a female cat, but the gender overall of this nakshatra is male. This refers to the general spiritual energy of the nakshatra. The bird associated is swan. The tree associated is bamboo. The color is lead. And related planet is basically the co-ruler, which is Mercury, because, well, to some extent also the moon. But yes, basically the planets that rule the signs that this nakshatra spans, Gemini, Cancer. And the deity is Aditi, which is the mother of gods, or also called the goddess of harvest. Another interesting thing to note, which I don't think I mentioned in previous videos, but I'm going to mention it here. This is a Chara nakshatra, which furthermore helps you to understand the nature of this nakshatra, which is that it is quite soft. Chara nakshatras, there are, I think, 6 or 7 subdivisions based on the nature. And the Chara nakshatras, I think there's like somewhere between 3 and 5 of them out of 27. Chara basically means movable nakshatras. So they are generally positive nakshatras, but they're not very stable. So they produce, let's say, mild auspicious results, or, yes, mildly positive nakshatras. Let me put it like that. So they're not particularly intense. So already you can kind of draw the conclusion by knowing that they are Deva and Chara, that this is a pretty gentle energy, okay? So you're not going to expect people who are very intense, angry, show a lot of negative traits, unlike the other two, but I'm going to get to those later. Okay. So also in the sky, this nakshatra will consists of 2 bright stars, which are Castor and Pollux, also called Alpha Geminorum and Beta Geminorum, representing the twins, the Gemini. They will also hint to the general duality present throughout these people's lives. And I think, oh no, I haven't mentioned. The literal description is from Punar, which means to repeat, and Vasu, which is ray of light. So it can literally translate into becoming light again, or something like that. So, some general characteristics associated with this nakshatra. They are generally good-hearted, they're considerate, they're friendly, content, they're nurturing, generous, easily can relate to other people. They also like to live in the moment, prefer simplicity. They can be religiously inclined. Well, to some extent, all of the Jupiterian nakshatras are somewhat religiously inclined or care about spirituality. They are focused on self-development. They're very gifted in communication of all sorts, can make good writers and inspirational speakers. On the dark side, they can be overly critical, indecisive, which is also the side influence of Mercury and a little bit of the moon. They can be overly focused on simplifying life to the point of becoming naive or lacking foresight, making mistakes out of naivety, basically. Their indecisiveness can also lead to instability in the worst case scenario. A lot of changes with respect to living situations, careers, relationships can become fickle. They can have a hard time holding a job even. Also, they can become overly detached and intellectualized, have a very intellectualized overview or outlook on life. Because of the focus on duality and repetitions, this nakshatra can show a tendency to redo or succeed at the second try. That's another thing. So for those of you who have this nakshatra prominently placed, I've actually heard this repeatedly, and I've seen it happen where, you know, let's say if you are, yeah, it literally means what I said, which is you could succeed the second time you try something. So like, let's say you want to pass an admission exam in a university. You may not make it the first time, but don't let that dishearten you, because you might make it the second time. You have high chances of making it the second time around, especially if you have Punarvasu connected to the 10th house, if it's related to career. If it's related to the 7th house, of course, depending on which areas of your life this nakshatra influences. If it's related to the 7th house, it could be that maybe the first marriage won't work out, but the second one will work out better. And of course, please take it with a grain of salt. Do not go into a panic, but this is sometimes true. Of course, you have to look, as usual, at the entire horoscope to make a more precise prediction. There's also, with respect to this nakshatra, there is a great deal of focus on recycling, reusing as well. So going hand in hand with the idea of something, you know. And which also kind of means that, well, in general, this nakshatra is actually very gentle. I've seen this a lot. Like, this could be like many of the devas, you know, people who are very gentle, who are very caring, considerate towards nature and animals. That's another thing. So they can be very conscientious when it comes to doing things for the environment. So this goes hand in hand with the recycling, reusing thing. With this nakshatra, also, yeah, this is another important thing to do with the karma connected to this nakshatra, is that the more you give, the more you will get back. So if you are generous, especially if you are generous, I mean, if you have prominent placements in this nakshatra, and especially if you are jealous, you know, whether it's with your time, your money, anything you want to give, but if you give without asking for anything in return, it will come back to you tenfold. This is a general truth. Sorry, mixed up my papers. Right, when it comes to the professions connected to Punarvasu, any kind of work connected to, so the general professions that, of course, this, again, if this is if this nakshatra is influencing your partner archetype, the partner dispositors, as I will describe in that video that I'm going to be linking in the description, then you can expect your partner to be in these professions or have these interests. And if you have them, like maybe if you have the Lord of the 10th house in Punarvasu, then this could be referring to you. So some of the jobs that are normally connected to Punarvasu can be jobs connected to tourism, the travel industry, hotel, restaurant management, trade, commerce, anything to do with construction, architecture, civil engineering. Right, this is something that I think I forgot to mention, is that these people can be homebodies a lot. So they actually, well, they also enjoy to travel because it's still a Jupiter-ruled nakshatra, but they are also very much attached to the home. Okay, so they care a great deal about comfort, about having nice things. So they won't be as adventurous generally as the other two Jupiterian nakshatras, which are a little bit wilder. Let me put it like that. So yes, so they will care about anything to do with basically real estate, things to do with construction, architecture, civil engineering, interior decorator, feng shui expert, anything to do with the home, furniture designer, whatever you can think about. All of these things could be something they will excel at or might be particularly interested in, maybe even if it is not their profession. Aside from that, they could also make very good scientists, very good professors, writers, teachers, professors, writers, public speakers, esoteric, people who are into esoteric studies, philosophers, ministers, religious leaders, historians, antique dealers, newspaper, people in the newspaper industry or publishing. Anything to do with building administration, also connected to flying, pilots, astronauts, and traveling in general. So errands, something to do with errands, like maybe running an errand business or being a delivery person, artisan, person who does things with their hands, creates things, innovators, also potential interest in archery or anything to do with the sport. So they might have an interest in archery. Yeah, and pretty much anything that could be connected with, making things with your hands, basically, is a potential profession that Punarvasu could excel at. And yeah, this is pretty much it. And this is not a lot about Punarvasu, to be honest, because this is probably, as far as I have seen, one of the simplest nakshatras to read. There's really not a lot of complication connected to it. And as far as other quirks or anything that I can say, I haven't really, there's really not much that I can add to basically the general characteristics. So yes, this is pretty much it. So I am going to be moving on to the next nakshatra, which is Vishakha. I'm mixing up my papers here or something. I think I'm missing a piece of paper. The struggle is real. Oh, no. It's here. Okay, so Vishakha, which spans from 20 degrees Libra to 3 degrees 20 minutes Scorpio in the sidereal zodiac, or 13 degrees 46 minutes to 27 degrees and 6 minutes Scorpio in the tropical zodiac. It translates into the forked one, the two-branched. A symbol is, or symbols. The symbol associated with this nakshatra is an archway covered with leaves used in marriages, or the triumphal gateway. So basically anything that symbolizes some kind of a triumphant entrance or a celebration is a symbol for this nakshatra. It's also called the star of purpose because it is very focused on goal. Like, it's very focused on a goal. These actually, well, almost as much as Purva Bhadrapada, are very much mission oriented in life. We'll get to it in a bit. The animal yoni, or the yoni animal, is the male tiger, the counterpart to Chitra, which was the female tiger. And the nature, or the gana, is Rakshasa. This is important because, yes, Rakshasas are the most savage types of nakshatras, also called demon nakshatras. And the gender is female. So here we have another dichotomy, as it was with the first one. The first one, the animal yoni, was the female cat, and the gender of the nakshatra was male. And with this one is the other way around. So the yoni is the male tiger, but the gender of the overall nakshatra is female. So the gender of the nakshatra refers to the overall energy of the nakshatra, whereas the yoni represents the more instinctive personality, the instinctive side of the personality. The star in the sky, sorry, is Alpha Librae. And class is outcast. And the nature of this nakshatra, I don't know if I wrote it here. Not the nature, the disposition, I think it is mixed, which means that it's actually one of two nakshatras that are mixed. The first one is Kritika, and there's an interesting connection here between Kritika and Vishakha, and I'm going to get to it towards the end. So yes, there is a connection between Vishakha and Kritika. So mixed in nature basically means that they are somewhere between fierce and mild. They're not as bad as the fierce ones, or the Ugra, or the Tikshna, I think they're called. Purva Bhadrapada is an Ugra, or a fierce nakshatra, which makes it potentially the most savage of the savage. That's why I also talked about it in the serial killer video that I made. But I'm going to get to Purva Bhadrapada at the end. But it's a mix between this fierce nakshatra and the softer ones, like I forgot what the soft ones are called, but it's not like Punarvasu, it's another name. So this basically just shows that they're not constantly aggressive, they're not like aggressive by default, but they have the potential to be aggressive, just like Kritika, which is a sun-ruled nakshatra, which I have covered in the sun-dominant nakshatras video that I am also going to be linking in the video. Okay, and some of the general characteristics. So let me see. Oh no, I didn't cover everything. Sorry. So the bird associated with this nakshatra is the red-tailed sparrow. I tried to look for pictures, and I'm not really sure. This could be a mistake or something. I tried to look for several sources. Maybe it was a different bird and they didn't translate properly or something. But it's a sparrow of some kind, so that's what I'm gonna post on the video. The tree associated is the wood apple, and related planets, Venus, which is the co-ruler because it's the ruler of Libra, and also Mars, which is the ruler of Scorpio. So because this nakshatra spans from 20 degrees Libra to 3 degrees 20 minutes Scorpio. The lucky color is golden. The presiding deity is Lord Indra, which is the god of transformation. And also Agni, which is the god of fire, which is also the god that presides over Kritika. Okay. Some general characteristics. Concentration, single-mindedness. So this nakshatra has multiple talents, and I'm not going to get into like really deep legends and stuff, but it's something about the previous nakshatra, which is Swati, is basically the victory, and this nakshatra is like the post-victory stage. So having that in mind, which is already kind of suggested by the fact that the symbol is a archway covered in leaves and flowers that is used in marriage, or the triumphal gateway. So already by saying these things, you kind of get the image that this is about celebration. This is about enjoying a success. And this already brings certain characteristics to this nakshatra and the natives, which is that they have a tendency to go for, they might actually have problems with things like addictions. They are very driven towards things like, basically debauchery in one word. So seeking a lot of material pleasure, a lot of sexual expression. This nakshatra, more than all the three of them actually, has the highest tendency towards infidelity actually. But I'm going to get to that in a little bit. So yes, they can struggle with things like addictions. This is also why this nakshatra can be potentially good at professions connected to alcohol, or working with alcohol, producing alcohol, being a bartender, etc. Again, we'll get more into that towards professions, when I talk about professions. But yes, this is an important thing to keep in mind. It's also, so the fact that it comes as the aftermath, so the energy that these natives embody is having succeeded at something, triumphant success at something, and now they're in the stage where basically they're bored. So they could start out in life being very driven towards materialism, but at the same time, the more materialistic they get, the more empty they feel. So eventually, or at the same time sometimes, they will start to develop their spiritual side. So they will start to feel a hunger towards understanding more and growing spiritually, intellectually. So yes, that's what I wanted to say from the beginning. So there's a lot of emphasis on physical pleasures. They also more, and I have seen this with the natives of Vishakha, is that they love ceremony and ceremony and pomp. So they don't just want to enjoy themselves by themselves in a dingy room. They want, loud parties and celebrations and weddings and, people dancing on tables, that kind of thing. And especially when they are the ones to be celebrated, that's what they would really like. They could be also overly focused on what they lack. So again, this goes back to struggling with emptiness, which will eventually drive them to seek spiritual enlightenment, especially later in life. There is also, like I said, a strong desire for them to continuously, basically, what's the word now? Actualize themselves. I was actually thinking now there is this channel called Self-Actualized, I think, org, or a website. I wonder if that guy, I think his name is Leo. I probably can't get his birth data, but I wonder if he has Vishakha placements, because there's a vibe that I get that could potentially show that he has Vishakha placement. Anyway, I digress. Strong desire. So they have a strong desire to grow. Like I said, they can oftentimes be avid readers. So even if they are not formally educated, these people constantly seek to read, to educate themselves, to be informed. They admire educated people as well. And this part, they can be very competitive and jealous. So this is the part when I have to get a little bit into the legend. To be honest, I haven't really fully understood it, and it's quite complicated, so I apologize in advance again if I'm going to butcher some details. But I'm going to give you the general idea, which is, so the Lord Indra that is presiding this nakshatra was leading an army into battle against this demon, Tarakasur or something like that, who was the head of the demon army. And this war was lasting for, I don't know, a very, very, very long time. This was, of course, all happening on a supernatural level, because these are gods and demons. And basically, there was something about Shiva offered to create a warrior to end the war, to kill Tarakasur and defeat the demon army. And it was like this entire, how should I put it, negotiation that actually lasted for hundreds of years or something, until this child was produced. Something about Shiva and his wife Parvati or something like that. I don't know, and Agni somehow stole Shiva's semen, if I understood correctly. It's all very fantastical, and again, I apologize if I don't know the details. But the general idea that I wanted to get to is that this baby, the son of Shiva, or however you want to call him, which was called Kartikeya, which is basically the hero of the nakshatra Kritika. This thing, this baby was born and literally within, I think, a few days killed 2 demons or something like that. And Indra, who saw how powerful this child was overtaken by envy and tried to kill it, I think, or wounded him or something like that. And basically, out of the wound of Kartikeya, two other deities were born, and together with Kartikeya, basically ended up almost defeating and killing Indra, but Shiva interfered and said, we're basically told Indra, don't do anything because this is the child that's going to end the war, so going to kill the head demon, which he did. But the bottom line is that out of this little legend, which I have kind of butchered a little bit, is this is where the envy part comes from. So this nakshatra, Vishakha, and Indra, which is their ruling deity, is extremely competitive. It's also hand in hand with the animal Yoni, which is the male tiger, which is a very angry, aggressive, always on, quote unquote, kind of energy. And basically, yes, this is something that I've definitely seen, especially in I would say the first and the fourth padhas, because the first one is sub-ruled by Mars, the first padha of Vishakha. The first padha is about 3 degrees and something. And the last one, which is falling in Scorpio. So the last 3 degrees and 20 minutes that fall in Scorpio, because these parts are influenced by Mars, it's going to make these people very envious. Very envious, okay? So, and competitive, like I said, and this is something that they're going to struggle with, and I've seen this a lot. Like, unlike, let's say, Purva Bhadrapada, which, even though Purva Bhadrapada technically is even more fierce in many ways, does not have the same intense competitive streak as Vishakha. And something that is also like, this is something that I have read about, and I've also seen in the charts of some people that I have analyzed, is that, and I should have mentioned this actually, I don't think I have, in the video that I did on dark childhood experiences, that a lot of the times Vishakha can show a troubled relationship with at least one of two parents. And I just realized, actually, because in that video I mentioned Will Smith as an example, and Will Smith also has Moon in Vishakha. He also has other things in his chart that show, explain that his father was a troubled individual, and I have talked about this more in that video that I made on dark childhood experiences, so you can go see the video if you would want to see more about this. But yeah, so this is something that can show up. It could show a troubled relationship with the parents, at least one of two parent figures. And also, this is, I think I have mentioned maybe repeatedly, or maybe I wanted to mention, that it is an extremely restless energy, probably even more than Purva Bhadrapada. Some of the general traits, the more positive traits that this nakshatra can have, they can be very successful through their own efforts. So self-made individuals, they are very high in intelligence, and also because they're continuously challenging themselves and, studying and reading. They can be really, in general, they can be very, very powerful achievers, so even overachievers, and I've actually seen some people in real life who have this placement, who fit the description of being overachievers. Also can have bright appearance, and can also have a lot of sex appeal, quote unquote. They generally have a lot of respect for people who are intelligent and spiritual, have a lot of enterprising spirit, they can also be very humanitarian. Also, another thing that I should have mentioned, now that I think about it, they have a strong desire for justice. They can be, well, much like any other Jupiter-ruled nakshatra, which I probably should have mentioned this, they can definitely have a humanitarian streak, which all of these nakshatras can be idealistic. They can embark on, solving social problems, social reform. I would say it's probably most emphasized in Purva Bhadrapada, but it's also present in Punarvasu and Vishakha. And yes, definitely with this placement, you can definitely see people who are fighting for justice. So even involved in the legislative system or in the justice system, like law. They can also be interested in politics or oriented towards politics. They can be very persuasive in their speech, have very good leadership qualities. They can also have this nakshatra probably more than the other two, although ironically it's also the one that has the most roaming or roving, what do you call them? Roaming or roving? I think roving eyes, meaning they have the highest tendency to cheat in relationships. They also have the strongest desire to get married, actually. So they care a great deal about the institution of marriage and having a family in the traditional sense and all that stuff. They can also be really good at math and exact sciences, and also they are very courageous and generally feel comfortable traveling, or they enjoy traveling a lot. Some of the less favorable traits. They can be, like I mentioned repeatedly, restless, militant. This is actually something that is true for all the Jupiter-ruled nakshatras. They can become even fanatical because of their belief systems, because that is a typical Jupiterian trait. I'm also going to link a video in the description that I did a while ago on the dark side of Jupiter, because that's also a little bit related to this topic, more than a little bit actually, talking about the potential dark sides of the Jupiter-ruled individuals. So yeah, they can be militant. They can be, they can quarrel a lot, so they can be argumentative, envious, like I said. They can be extremely ambitious, overly critical. This is another thing with this nakshatra, that they can have a really rough way of expressing themselves. Like they can very easily offend other people, hurt other people's feelings. And again, I've known people in real life that fit this description. Like they can be very blunt, to put it mildly. But also conversely, they themselves can be very easily offended. And going hand in hand with the easily offended part, they also can have a tendency to feel victimized sometimes, or like people take advantage of them. Whether this is real or imagined, or sometimes they enable people, but they don't even realize it. They can also be very possessive and suspicious. This is especially relevant for you if you have the partner archetypes here. This could be a situation where these people are very jealous. I would say, again, this is especially true for maybe not so much the first. It depends also on the partner if they make them suspicious. But I would say especially in the first and the last padha, which are influenced by Mars as well. So they are more likely to be jealous and possessive. And they can also be scattered. They can also be very manipulative and use their charm and intelligence on the dark side. You know, if they cross over to the dark side, they can take advantage of other people by using their charms and skills of being persuasive and manipulative. Do not like to take advice, do not take advice easily. They can also get very greedy, which goes hand in hand with that materialism. They can also be aggressive. Oh, and this is a really big one. They can be very authoritarian or domineering. And as far as I've seen, I actually have seen, and even if you look at the examples that I have shown on the screen of people who have Vishakha placements, I think you can kind of detect the domineering streak with some of them at least. They can definitely have this tendency to, like, I've actually met some, I'm sorry to say this, who I think were narcissists, but I don't think it's necessarily true that this nakshatra itself creates more narcissists or something. Of course, you have to look at the general influence of a horoscope, but they can be definitely very domineering. and kind of goes hand in hand with that hyper competitiveness. So some of the professions that you can see associated with this nakshatra, the nakshatra of Vishakha, is researchers, scientists, soldiers, or any kind of military profession or professions connected to defense. Writers, of course, also athletes or people who are into stuff like, martial arts and stuff. Writers, politicians, lawyers, public speakers, anything to do with, legislation. Like I said, lawyers, public speakers, immigration officials, people involved with the police, detective work, guards, manual laborers as well. Actually, they could be good at anything physical because usually these people have a sturdy physique, especially if they work on it. Also can make good broadcasters, public speakers, like I said. Good at anything to do with sports, can be athletes, sports figures. And also, like I mentioned towards the beginning, they can work in anything connected to beverages, alcohol, I guess to a lower extent, drugs. But yeah, dancers also. But yeah, things to do with spirits, substances as well, to some extent, can definitely be professions connected to Vishakha. Yeah. So this is pretty much what I wanted to say. Oh yes, wait, there is another thing I wanted to say that I don't think I got into, because it's connected to Kritika. So Kritika and this nakshatra are the only ones that are mixed in nature or disposition, however you want to call it. Basically they're fierce mild, quote unquote, in the sense that they can be fierce and switch from being fierce to being soft and back again. And it's also interesting because Kritika as well is a female nakshatra, but Kritika also can be very savage, very blunt, very destructive. But the thing that is in common is that there could be a theme also of unusual reproductive situations, in the sense that so if this is, you're reading this for your future spouse, future partner, your future partner could have been adopted or conceived through an unconventional method like in vitro fertilization, or I don't know, by use of a surrogate. There are all kinds of modern technologies, so that could be something. Or the children you're going to have together. So the children that you're going to have together with your spouse could be by use of, unconventional methods with, surrogacy, adoption, and so forth. So in other words, there could be potential problems connected to fertility. Could be. It's not a given, but similarly to Kritika, with Kritika, it's a similar story. That there could be fertility issues. Another thing that I have noticed personally, I haven't read this in the general descriptions, but, well, it kind of is easy to deduce from everything else that falls under the characteristics of this nakshatra, is that they can be very rough on their, not just their spouses, but they can be very rough on their kids as well. And like this authoritarian, domineering nature can translate into, raising their kids like the kids are in boot camp or something. And which I think can, if you see some of the examples on the screen, I think if you do some research, you will see evidence that what I'm saying is pretty accurate about their attitudes towards how to raise their kids. And also, I don't think I mentioned this, but it's kind of like, I guess I just assumed it's kind of understood. Because it's another Jupiter-ruled nakshatra, you can also see this connected to what was it? Yeah, priestly profession, not priestly profession, how do you call it? Religious leaders, okay? So they could be like religious teachers, spiritual teachers, even religious leaders. And also, well, they can also do well, actually Vishakha can definitely do well in entertainment. Similarly, actually, to Purva Bhadrapada. So yeah, this is pretty much what I can say about Vishakha. So moving on to the next, the first, the last, my everything. I'm kidding. The one and only, the layer of demons and the alpha and the omega, Purva Bhadrapada. This is probably the most talked about nakshatra, I think, in, maybe not in Vedic astrology traditionally, but I think it's probably one of the most talked about nakshatras that I have noticed within astrological communities right now. And I think the reason for, well, not just astrological communities, I also mentioned this in a community post that I made a while ago, that I really think we are in the age of Purva Bhadrapada right now. I won't get into this during this video because the subject alone would probably take me at least an hour to talk about. But just some of the things that are happening, look at the fact that, you know, cartels are taking over. The mafia has never been stronger. We have issues with religious fanatics. These are all the dark side of Purva Bhadrapada, the shadow side of humanity that everyone has to deal with, and issues surrounding freedom. Freedom has never been more talked about, but people are abusing freedom more than ever before. There's like freedom without responsibility, typical Purva Bhadrapada shadow side. And the last straw for me, to be honest, it was this focus on body positivity, of encouraging morbid obesity. Not that I'm throwing shade, because technically I'm also overweight, but it's like this encouraging of, let's just be super complacent and accept ourselves. Basically, again, going hand in hand with the idea of freedom without thinking about consequences. I think that's what it boils down to. And that, to me, was kind of like the last straw that made me think we are definitely in the age of Purva Bhadrapada, if I had any doubts before. And the reason I say that is because basically Jupiter is about growth. And in Purva Bhadrapada, more than the other nakshatras, it can take on the negative expression of growth, which is overindulgence. Or even worst case scenario, not necessarily related to the weight issue, but think about the fact that Jupiter in medical astrology rules Cancer, basically. I mean, it doesn't rule, in its more negative sense, it rules Cancer, which is uncontrolled growth of cells. Jupiter is about growth. I mean, technically it rules the thighs as well, because it's connected to Sagittarius. And it rules a bunch of other things, but in its negative expression, it rules Cancer, which Cancer also is a thing. Drugs are a thing, which again, Purva Bhadrapada. And also, last but not least, the fascination with magic, Harry Potter, this thing about The Secret. And I'm not saying that it's wrong. It's just, I'm just saying it's all hand in hand with Purva Bhadrapada, and also the overemphasis on fantasy and fantasy worlds as well, to some extent, Purva Bhadrapada. But okay, I digress, because this was all just kind of like a warm-up. So, getting into the general characteristics. The sidereal zodiac, in the sidereal zodiac, Purva Bhadrapada spans from around 20 degrees Aquarius to 3 degrees 20 minutes Pisces. In the tropical zodiac, it spans from 13 degrees 46 minutes to 27 degrees 6 minutes Pisces. It translates into the former one who possesses lucky feet. That is a mouthful. The symbols associated can be a sword, the two front legs of a bed or funeral cot, the two-faced man. Also, when it comes to the symbol, I have looked for basically a funeral cot. Now I realize I could have looked for a two-faced man. Maybe I'm going to put the two-faced man on. I don't know. But I was going to say that I eventually settled on a Viking ship in flames, because I was tired of seeing dead people on funeral cots, and I got depressed, and I couldn't find one that looked nice. But just wanted to throw that in. And it's also called the scorching or burning pair. The animal yoni connected to this is the male lion, or the angry lion, sometimes it's called. The interesting thing about this, I'm already making a parenthesis, is that when I dug into it, it's actually connected to a mythical creature that was called Yali. Maybe I'm going to put a picture up. That is basically a lion, and apparently there are statues of this creature in southern India, and it had the body of a lion and the trunk and the tusks of an elephant. It's quite savage looking, which I think just further emphasizes the weirdness of this nakshatra. But you know, that was the mythical creature kind of associated with this nakshatra. But the animal yoni is the male lion now. The nature or the gana is manusya, or human. The gender is male. The disposition is ugra, like I said, I also mentioned before, which is fierce or severe. So the nakshatras that are ugra, which I think are in total 5. I'm pretty sure the other ones are Bharani, Magha, Purva Falguni, and Purva Ashadha. I remember I also mentioned this in a video that Hitler had 3 planets in Purva Ashadha. Of course, again, not trying to generalize anything, you always have to take everything into account. It's not just, you know, I have 1 planet in this nakshatra, so therefore I'm going to be a mass murderer. And of course, you always have free will, so it's not like anything's going to happen without your permission. But unless it's like sent by God, I mean, yes, then it will happen without your permission. So what was I going to say? Basically, yes, these ugra or fierce nakshatras are naturally more aggressive, and there are also similarly another group called Tikshna, which includes Jyeshta, Ashlesha, and I don't know, a bunch of others. And those are also very destructive. Also, Ardra falls in the other one. Ardra, which is the cousin of Purva Bhadrapada. These two are probably the most savage. I'm going to talk about Ardra in the Rahu dominant nakshatra video. So these are really the most aggressive, and they also, what they have characteristic to them by comparison to Tikshna is they also have the ability to detach from their feelings very well, which I also kind of talked about in the video that I did again on serial killers. I mentioned there how Purva Bhadrapada, especially the parts that fall in Aquarius, can become very cold-blooded and even come across as psychopathic. because of the ability, not necessarily because they are not capable of empathy or because they don't have emotions, especially Purva Bhadrapada, they can have very intense emotions, but they also have the ability to just cut off their emotions on command sometimes if they get, you know, in the right state of mind, or if they control themselves enough. But I digress. The tree associated with this nakshatra is the mango tree, which so made me laugh because I have 2 planets in this nakshatra myself. And just as I came across this piece of information, I was finishing my mango smoothie. Now, according to some sources, in multiple sources, I have found that the tree associated is the mango, which pleases me because I really like mangoes. But then in other sources, I found that it's the neem or the neem. I think it's the neem. But I'm going to put pictures of both of them, so I think they kind of from a distance look similar. The color associated, or the lucky color of this nakshatra, is silver gray. Silver gray. Related planets are Saturn and Rahu. Rahu technically is not a planet, but I'm going to call it a planet because I don't want to overcomplicate things. But yes, because these are the co-rulers of Aquarius, the Padha that falls in Pisces is just ruled by Jupiter. It is a purely Jupiterian Padha. The presiding deity, which is very interesting, Aja Ekapada, the one-footed goat, or as it is translated into, the one-footed goat sometimes, or the one-footed unborn one, is a manifestation of Shiva, which is the god of destruction in Hinduism. It's also, Shiva is also connected to Ardra. I would say even stronger to Ardra than to Purva Bhadrapada. This is why I think that I see Purva Bhadrapada and Ardra as cousins. And I'm probably going to do a more in-depth video on just these two at some point in the future. But this deity, the one-footed goat, is basically is also can see or also can be seen as the one-legged snake or a serpent of Kundalini, and it is seen as a deity of dark magic or black magic, any forms of dark magic. It's one of the 11 Rudras. Okay, as far as I understood, Rudra is the physical avatar of Shiva. So, yes, it is a dark deity that rules all kinds of black magic. So, I actually was thinking about this when I did the video on Ketu. I did a video, again, a pretty long time ago, called The Archetypes of Ketu. And I talked there about how Ketu is all about darkness and weirdness and spirits and ghosts. Well, Purva Bhadrapada, even when I was making that video, I was thinking, like, this actually sounds a lot like Purva Bhadrapada, like, should I mention this? But eventually I decided, I was going to leave Purva Bhadrapada separately. But to a large extent, Purva Bhadrapada, even though it has nothing to do with Ketu per se, is in many ways similar. It's similar, but it's not the same as having a strong Ketu, because it is very focused on spirituality. It's much more intense. That's a huge difference between Ketuvian. So a person who has a strong Purva Bhadrapada is generally going to be way more intense, potentially even have a kind of a fierce nature. But the thing that they have in common is this attraction towards spirituality, cultivating, maybe even potentially getting into black magic or, conjuring things and stuff like that, demons and whatever. I have seen it, believe me. I haven't done anything like that myself, but I have sort of had tangencies with people who have, which has been enough for me to realize that I don't want anything to do with it. Yeah, so anyway, I digress. So this Aja Ekapada, this is the deity connected to it, Black Magic Woman. That's a song that I like by Santana. So anyway, this nakshatra is located in the constellation of Pegasus, which is like, really, I have to make another break here because, I was so, when I was doing the research, for this nakshatra more in depth, I was kind of blown away by how it describes my own existence, because when I was around 10 years old, I had a couple of paintings exhibited at some kind of a school exhibition. One of them was a black and white theme that I decided to paint a lot of Pegasus horses for. Technically, that was incorrect because there was only one Pegasus horse, but I painted a bunch of them in the sky. and then I had another painting that was a stormy sea with thunder and lightning. That was a cry for help that nobody saw. But aside from that, now I realize that I have Sun and Venus in Purva Bhadrapada, so especially Venus, which has to do with the sense of aesthetic, probably that's where the inspiration came from. And now I found out that Purva Bhadrapada actually is connected to Pegasus, the winged horse. What do you know? Amazing. And plus there are other ways in which I feel very much called out by this nakshatra, but I won't talk about the story of my life. So yes, it is located in the constellation of Pegasus, the winged horse. It's also comprised of two stars, Markab or Alpha Pegasus, or Pegas, and Skeet. I think it's Skeet, Scheat, Beta Pegasi. Also, there's an interesting legend behind the Pegasus as well, which actually kind of seems to be harmonizing with the general energy of Purva Bhadrapada, because the story, again, was something that Pegasus was Zeus's favorite horse, or Jupiter's favorite horse, depending on how you want to call him. If you were a Roman, you would have called him Jupiter. So he was like an immortal horse, and he was supposed to carry some great warrior into battle, and then one day he just decided to kick the warrior off his back and basically headed towards the heavens, which and then became immortal and immortalized on the sky. which kind of reinforces this idea that, you know, of extreme independence that is associated with this nakshatra, and complete unruliness, and basically not wanting to be told what to do by any stretch of the imagination. And other characteristics. So defining traits, characteristics, okay? Like I said, independence, but also capable of sacrificing, purifying themselves for a higher purpose. This nakshatra, more than any other nakshatra, has a very strong need for a mission. This is why they become derailed in life when they start to, not they start, but they fail to find a higher purpose. You know, they fail to find something greater than themselves that they need to fight for. Usually something idealistic. These, especially since this nakshatra falls in Aquarius and Pisces, it's very much focused on bringing, you know, reforms and changing the things that they see as wrong in society. And yes, often have idealistic goals, like I said, aspirations for improving society. They can also be very charismatic and eloquent, and also have, they can be very motivating. They can be very good at educating. They are also capable of extreme intensity and also have a great capacity for transformation. Well, unfortunately, both in a negative and a positive sense. Extreme perseverance, basically obsession. And the reason I say that is because, especially in Aquarius, there is the co-influence of Rahu, which further emphasizes potential obsessive tendencies, and also because of their intense nature. Some sources that I have come across say that all sexual perversions come out of this nakshatra, which I find very, very dubious, especially since, again, I have some placements here and I do not fall in that category at all. Like, I'm pretty much asexual, so I resent that. But I guess this is something that I have seen. I mean, I can't say that I have seen it. I don't know. I mean, obviously, this is a topic that it's not like I can just go and ask people who, excuse me, like, do you have any weird perversions that I should know of? You know, people who come over for a consultation. But, and I haven't seen this happening, even though this nakshatra, and I have talked about it, does show up a lot in the charts of serial killers, of murderers, of people involved in the underworld and all that stuff. I don't know about the sexual stuff, to be honest. I think it's more about, you know, freedom and power in its worst expression. I mean, this nakshatra can create, like I said, and even the desire for power, if you ask me, is subdued to the desire for freedom at the end of the day. It's not because they want power, it's more like they want the freedom to do whatever they feel like, and therefore they seek power, if that makes sense, which is different from Vishakha, for instance, which I would say, as far as I noticed, just wants power for the sake of power and for the sake of being celebrated and, you know, revered and all that stuff. But yeah, I have read in sources that, also another source that I came across said that this nakshatra is like a dark version of Ashlesha. There's also some connection, probably because of Age of Aquarius, to the Nagas, that are these deities associated to Ashlesha, serpent-like deities. So there's like this relation to Kundalini. So there could be something connected to, you know, weird sexual perversions, potentially. Yeah. But they are a dark version of Ashlesha that kind of stood out to me. Which Ashlesha, I have talked about it, and it is probably the nakshatra that is the sexiest as far as, and I've actually seen a lot of people with Ashlesha placements that can pass for very seductive and seem to have that kind of energy. So this is like, some people call Purva Bhadrapada like the dark Ashlesha. Basically, they're like Ashlesha, but they have a creepy side as well. And Another thing is they can be extremely intelligent. They can be unbiased, simple, and peace-loving. So in their positive expression, I'm going to start by, I'm going to talk about the positive expressions, but bear in mind that this is a nakshatra of extremes. Also, I don't think I mentioned this, did I? I'm going to mention it now. The bird associated, but I'm going to put the picture of the bird. The bird associated, I was going to say this, the avocet. It's a black and white bird, which kind of stood out to me because already when it's that black and white pattern made me think like the reason this bird is associated to Purva Bhadrapada is precisely because this is a nakshatra of extremes. It's sometimes in, literally black or white, because you can have people who are in Purva Bhadrapada who are ascetics, who are very spiritual, who are dedicated to truth and honesty and justice, and stand up for the underdog, so to speak, or they stand up for people who suffer injustice, and they basically dedicate themselves to create quality things, to change the world for the better. And by the same token, you can find the worst of the worst in this nakshatra. The murderers, like I mentioned. Actually, as I was doing research for this nakshatra, I came across another killer who has moon in Purva Bhadrapada. His name was, I think, Richard Ramirez. I didn't want to put him up in the examples because I thought it was too dark. Also, O.J. Simpson, who, of course, was an alleged. Now, I don't think you can even say he was allegedly a murderer, but I think he was, to be honest. That's just my personal opinion. But, so yeah, you can have the lowest of the low. You can also have people who are gangsters, who are, in all of these underground systems, organized crime, etc., fanatics, terrorists. The worst of the worst people can be under this nakshatra, because it all depends on which path they take, because they tend to be imbalanced. That's a theme, but I'm gonna get to the conclusions in a bit. Right, so in general, in their positive expression, they can be extremely intelligent. Like I said, they can be God-fearing people with a lot of interest in the supernatural. They are truth seekers. In fact, in their positive expression, this is probably the most honest nakshatra. This is the most bluntly, savagely honest. I'm talking emperor is naked level of truthfulness that you can imagine. And I also find it interesting that not just this nakshatra, but especially in this nakshatra, I found 2 comedians, or more than 2, I think 3. 3? I don't know. I posted the examples on the video. I'm going to post them on the video, and I found it interesting. The reason why is because I think they're drawn to comedians, because being a comedian is basically a role that you can play where you can speak truths that you would normally not be allowed to say, basically. If you're a comedian, you can say whatever. Well, nowadays, not so much, but even nowadays, right, you can speak a lot of truths and veil them under the cloak of, it was a joke, it was meant to be funny, but in reality, they can speak a lot of really savage truths that normally nobody would have the courage to say out loud if you didn't have this, this special exemption for being a comedian. So yeah, so much about the truth, the focus on the truth seeking. And they do not like to use deception at all. They don't want to manipulate at all. They don't like deceit. They don't like tricks. They don't like to be fake at all. Also, generally, their general disposition is actually quite optimistic, friendly, and generous, despite the fact that even in their positive expression, they can be very intense, very high-strung. They can come across as anxious, nervous, angry, etc. I'm going to get more into it in a bit. Generally, they have a pure heart, though. They also have a lot of love and compassion for humanity in general. Also, they can be very adventurous, very brave, very also inclined towards astrology, ding, 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 and occult sciences, self-reliant, usually can prefer to run their own venture if they can. Can I just say that? Bless if you can run your own venture. And but they generally prefer to run their own venture as opposed to being employed, because again, being employed means you have to listen to orders from other people, which is completely against their nature. They're driven by purpose, determination, and hard work, amazing perseverance. Can try to achieve of course, this is where we get to the dark side, they can try to achieve their desires by wrongful means. I would say a lot of this also depends on entourage and how much abuse they go through. They seek knowledge for the sake of knowledge, but the knowledge that they seek can also lead them to amass wealth. They can be really clever in creating money. Also, they can be easily spotted in a crowd by their level of intensity and high-strung nature. So the general strengths, some of the general strengths: logical, witty, can create their own wealth through cleverness. Economical, they have longevity, they can be scholarly, could marry or be born into wealth. Good to know. Especially for those of you who are listening to this for your partner archetype, or, well, for yourself as well. Warrior spirit, they have to have a warrior spirit because this nakshatra will put you through trials and tribulations. Passionate, skilled at earning an income from all kinds of means. They can be idealistic, fight injustice, mystical, good writers or speakers, imaginative, intuitive, non-conforming, marches to their own beat. Devoted to the people they admire. The weaknesses associated with this nakshatra are being pessimistic, gloomy, skeptical, nervous, angry, impulsive, can change residence many times, can be unstable, similarly to Vishakha, can be dominated by spouse or be domineering towards the spouse. This is also a thing. Frugal, but also not very good at managing money or financial planning. They can also experience poor health, especially problems with their feet because of the one-footed goat. Wavering mind, and again, high-strung anxiety, can be intense and angry. So before I get to the professions, some of the things that I also wanted to say, so I apologize to the other nakshatras, but this nakshatra, I would say also because, again, it is very much in the collective consciousness, not so much because I personally sought a lot more information about it, but I just have come across a lot more information about it. And one thing that I wanted to say is that this, and I have heard this being said in multiple sources, that this is the most masculine nakshatra. And now that I think about it, I think I see where that is coming from. Because when you think about it, even the other two Jupiter-ruled nakshatras, which are also masculine, and the Mars-ruled nakshatras are also masculine. But this nakshatra, when you think about it, it's all male. Like, it has a male animal, which is the lion, as a yoni. It is a male nakshatra overall, so the energy, the spiritual energy associated with this nakshatra is male. And then it's also an ugra, which is an aggressive nakshatra. So, and the symbol, the deity, the Aja Ekapad thing, I will put a photo, or I have put already a photo in the video with this deity. It basically looks like a phallic symbol, right? Because it has just one, like, it's like its feet are tied into one. So it gives this impression of imperviousness and basically complete, how should I put it? Something you cannot change, right? Like, it's just unbreakable. It's like tough, compact, does not allow anything to influence it. And it's basically very imbalanced. It's a very imbalanced energy. When you think of, for instance, Vishakha, Vishakha, for instance, is a female nakshatra. So even though it has the male tiger as a yoni, there's still some inner balance there. There's parts of it that are feminine, parts of it that are masculine. Same thing with almost every other nakshatra that I came across. I'm not 100% sure. I would have to go through all of them, all the 27 of them. But if I remember correctly, this is probably the only one that has so much intensity in one place. And this is actually going hand in hand with something that I have read about it, which is that it creates imbalance. By its nature, it is already imbalanced. That's why it has so much restlessness, so much aggression, a tendency to be angry. And because of this, it becomes extreme. It's very easy for them to become imbalanced. And in fact, the ideal partners for Purva Bhadrapadas, for Jupiterians in general, are the Saturnians. But especially for Purva Bhadrapada, their ideal partner is Uttara Bhadrapada, the nakshatra that comes right after it. Because the Uttara Bhadrapada is, the Saturnians actually in general, especially Uttara Bhadrapada, is cooling off. It's cooling off the energy of Purva Bhadrapada. It's soothing. So it's stabilizing this energy, which is very much out of balance. But because of this overly masculine energy, yeah, like I said, this is where the extremism comes from. Their tendency to become obsessive. Sometimes, and especially with men, I have read this, and it's probably true as far as I've seen. Also looking at some of the examples that I have found on the screen, it can make men be even sex addicts, right? Like, it can make especially men very restless in the sense that they're constantly seeking, pleasure in relationships to women, because, and I think subconsciously or consciously, it's a way to try to balance out their constant restlessness. And yeah, it's also this nakshatra Purva Bhadrapada together with Uttara Bhadrapada have a connection to the goddess Lakshmi. This is why in some sources they say that, especially with respect to the men who are born in Purva Bhadrapada, that they are slaves to their wives or dominated by their wives, which I think is an exaggeration. Some of these texts are, they're ancient and whatever. Like, they're very biased and one-sided. I don't think it's quite like that, but I think what it actually tries to say is that these men can become addicted to women. I think it's more like they can become womanizers and, spend a lot of time, energy, and whatever chasing skirts. Not so much that they're actually literally going to be dominated or abused by their spouses or anything like that. Then by the same token, you also are going to come across theories that say, especially if you're a man and you have, let's say, Venus in Purva Bhadrapada, that your wife is going to be a beast or something. Then she's going to be, not like physically, because this has nothing to do with the physical, this is about energy, but the idea being that, the women of Purva Bhadrapada are very masculine, and spiritually, yes, it is probably true. They have characteristics that, according to our very narrow-minded vision of gender and social organization, come across as masculine. But, on a spiritual plane, there really is no such thing as masculine and feminine. And in the sense that, we don't, on a spiritual plane, masculine and feminine don't mean the same thing. That's what I'm trying to say. So it's like, but yes, in society, women who have prominent Purva Bhadrapada can come across as masculine. And especially when it comes to relationships, not just relationships, but in general, these women are probably going to have a mind of their own. They're going to be very independent. All of the characteristics that I have mentioned connected to this nakshatra so far. So some of the interpretations say that, of course, if you're a man and you basically have drawn the short straw when you have been born with these nakshatras around your partner dispositors, because you're going to attract, a harpy. But I don't think that's accurate at all, because, of course, it varies based on a lot of other things. But one thing you should take into account, of course, is that these people, the most important thing for them is respect. If you don't respect them, that's when they show their ugly side. And the thing about them is that on the surface, they will not come across as necessarily aggressive. Especially the women. I mean, if you've looked at the examples on the screen, some of the best looking actresses in history, the most feminine looking actresses, have had prominent Purva Bhadrapada placements. Also, actually, if you look at the examples, these are also women who were known to be quite feisty. and independent and even aggressive at times. So yes, you have to respect them, and then they will respect you, basically. It's all about respect with these people. That's why, yeah, I actually thought about this for a while, that you know, if you look at these, like, gangster movies, like, about, again, the mafia or whatever, they're all about respect, which makes sense why you see Purva Bhadrapada going hand in hand with these underground families and stuff, because, you know, it's all about, like, who disrespected who, or who respects who, and basically lack of respect within these, like, for instance, crime family movies is a reason for someone to get whacked, basically. And this is actually not far off from the general mentality of Purva Bhadrapada. There's nothing that they hate more than not being respected. This is also something that I wanted to mention, because I read this really dumb article a while ago, and not just the article, actually, I've come across it in multiple sources, that women don't care about respect, which I thought was, like, the dumbest thing I've ever read in my entire life. But I think it's stupid in general, but I would say it's especially stupid if you have to deal with a woman who has heavy Purva Bhadrapada and a bunch of other, you know, more masculine nakshatras. That is the worst thing you can do, is to disrespect them, or to think that, you know, she maybe wants you to treat her rough or something, like some nonsense like that. Forget about it. No, if you don't treat this person with respect, it will be the worst for you. And the thing about Purva Bhadrapada, this is also something that I wanted to say. I actually thought about this intuitively, but now the more research I did about it, the more I realized that I think I was accurate. Like, I feel even further more confident in my assessment that Vishakhas and a bunch of other, you know, the reason why Purva Bhadrapada is associated with murderers is because they don't really care about the winning part. Let's say, by comparison to Vishakha. Vishakhas are fighters, you know, and Vishakha also having a Rakshasa Gana. Usually people who have Rakshasa Ganas come across as aggressive, so people know to stay away from them. You know, they usually, you know, come across as intimidating and tough, and it's visible. People can pick it up. You know, they can pick up that this is a person you don't want to mess with. But Purva Bhadrapada, also similarly to Ardra, which I would say is probably the second in command when it comes to things like murderers and crimes, and especially outbursts of anger that are very destructive. These are Manushya nakshatras, or human nakshatras, which means that it also, both of them incidentally are connected to the idea of two-facedness. You know, Purva Bhadrapada is connected to having two faces, one that you keep in private and one that you show to the world. And Ardra also, because it's connected to Gemini, it falls in Gemini, same thing. So these people are very good at keeping one face in public and concealing their nature, concealing their anger. This is why sometimes people think they can push them around, or because, you know, Purva Bhadrapada in general, they are happy-go-lucky, they are very nice, but that doesn't mean that they're not capable of really ruthless things. And a lot of people, you know, because they see them, like, nice on the surface, like, they maybe joke around. That's another thing. That's why I mentioned there are comedians in this nakshatra more than in a lot of other nakshatras. And they seem like, you know, very approachable and laid back, and, you know, like they wouldn't hurt a fly. But you don't know how fast these people can switch from, you know, from one phase to another. I actually can think about two people that I met well, to be honest, myself as well sometimes, but it takes me a lot to really make me that angry. But I have had some instances where the people who have seen me angry, like, still avoid me in public years after. But there are two people that I can think about that I've met at work who have Purva Bhadrapada. Actually, one of my former co-workers, and the reason I knew his date of birth was, well, because I like to figure out people's date of births. I've been having this hobby for a long time now. And this guy in question, I actually remember now that I was looking for celebrity examples, that he actually looked a lot like Robert De Niro. He even had like the mole on the cheek. And I remember thinking that the first time I saw him at work, that he kind of looked like Robert De Niro. And he's had this kind of really approachable air about him, typical Purva Bhadrapada, and also had sun in Purva Bhadrapada, I think moon in Anuradha, if I remember correctly. And this guy was like, you know, he would joke around. You would always hear him in the office telling jokes. You know, he seemed really laid back, you know, carefree, sorry, not careless. No, he didn't seem careless. But like he seemed really, you know, just relaxed, like the kind of person that you could talk about anything around him. He wouldn't get upset. Then one day he was like telling some story, like really in his typical humor, like joking around, whatever. And then he started talking about how he got into a bar fight or something, and how, you know, he got really angry at this person. And you could literally tell how he flipped, like from within a split second, from being, you know, happy-go-lucky, relaxed, to all of a sudden being really crazy, intense, angry. And like, not angry at us, but like you could tell him getting worked up about it. And already it was like, you know, everybody in the office was staring at him like, okay, that got dark really quickly. And I can think of like a similar incidents that happened with a woman that I know who has ascendant in Purva Bhadrapada. I won't get into that story because it's really going to drag on. But it was a similar situation where this was a woman who on the surface you would never tell that she was angry, or that, you know, she would have outbursts, or that she was capable of anything violent. And all of a sudden, you know, I witnessed an incident where she got really angry to the point where I was looking for emergency exits. Not at me even, but just being around her. It was like, oh my God, I need to get the hell out of here before before she turns her attention to me or something like that. And yeah, but this is something that I wanted to say, is that I think actually one of the reasons why these people become very aggressive is because they get disrespected a lot. And the reason they get disrespected is because oftentimes, especially early on in life, they are very bluntly honest and they don't play the usual social games. So people think that they're idiots a lot of the times. That happened to me as well when I was growing, not just when I was growing up, shit, even a few years ago, before the pandemic. Because people just think that, you know, if you don't, quote, know how the world works, which I hate that phrase, meaning if you don't play the usual games, especially in an office setting or in a formal setting, people just think that you're completely insane or something, or that, yeah, or like you're just plain dumb. You don't know how things work. But in reality, these people are just ruthlessly honest and authentic a lot of the times. So people trying to push them around, or sometimes what happens, and this especially happens to women, I think, is that they attract a lot of hatred, especially from men, because they are very powerful. They have a sort of aura about them that makes men threatened, because, you know, again, having masculine energy as a woman makes you seem like a threat, or makes you seem, in today's world, even if you shut up and don't say anything about politics or feminism, you're going to be attacked for being a feminist by just being yourself. You know, if you have a more masculine energy, or an energy that is perceived to be more masculine, because it's important to make that distinction. But yeah, pretty much. And I think this is why so many Purva Bhadrapadas deal with anger and hatred, on top of which this is a nakshatra because of its nature, which is, I also wanted to get to this, it's associated with the burning. It's also associated with Agni to some extent, or not necessarily Agni, but the idea of purifying fire and fire in general. It's associated to fire. One of the symbols that I have heard being associated with it is an infinite pillar of fire, which also leads to the idea of Kundalini awakening, the snake, the Aja Ekapad god. So the pillar of fire, and which to me, especially now that I'm into tarot, it leads me to think of the Tower card in tarot, which shows collapse. And it actually, and another symbolism from Vedic astrology is a burning lighthouse, which is literally even more similar to the Tower card of the tarot, the Rider-Waite tarot, which is, well, not the Rider-Waite, I think the original tarot, it came from older, from like the 1800s or even before. Anyway, basically it's a burning building from which people are falling out, symbolizing a collapse, because this nakshatra is about being burned down to your essence. It's like where it shows up in your horoscope, it shows painful experiences. This is why, it's a fierce, savage nakshatra connected to thunder and destruction and all this stuff, because it's about purifying yourself of materialism and ego on a spiritual plane. This is, of course, if you don't get switched over to the dark side and make your entire life focus on materialism and so on and so forth. So basically get very much entangled in the Maya to the point where you don't see which way is up anymore. But yes, so there are a lot of painful experiences, and also, like I mentioned, in the dark childhood experiences, similarly to Vishakha, again, it can show a parent that was abusive, especially if there are malefics associated with this nakshatra. So like if you have malefic planets aspecting the planet in Purva Bhadrapada, or something like that. Or maybe maybe Jupiter, the lord of the Purva Bhadrapada, is in a bad state or afflicted by malefics. There can be multiple scenarios, or maybe you look for how it changes in the divisional charts. Does Jupiter become debilitated in the divisional charts? Or Jupiter, the ruler of this nakshatra, that's another thing. Or the planet that is sitting in Purva Bhadrapada, what is it sitting in the Navamsha or in another divisional chart? Because that can also show if the planet becomes debilitated or something, that you're going to have a rougher time in the second half of life, or you're going to go through some, major ups and downs. Yeah, but that's something that I wanted to say. So, where was I? Aside from this, I wanted to speak about some, another thing that I want to say now I remember. Because of the association to the two-faced man, and this is true, going hand in hand with the idea that these people have two faces. And again, I think the reason they have two faces is precisely because in this world, it's like almost impossible if you don't have two faces for these people, because their nature, oftentimes by social standards and by the rules of society, is unacceptable. So they have to conceal their true selves in public. And some of them can become very, very good at showing one face to the world and a totally different face in private. And this could be to various degrees. This can range from just them having a bunch of quirky hobbies. Like, for instance, in my case, very few people know about the fact that I am into astrology to the point that I have a little channel. Like, because I don't talk about it. I'm definitely not going to talk about it, with people that I work with who are going to treat me like a freak. But this is a relatively harmless example. Now, it can range from something like this to them being a part of a cult and not telling you, being part of some kind of weird satanic rituals and not telling you. And I'm especially talking about potential romantic partners. They could be a part of some kind of a religious group or a cult, like I said, or they could have some side that you don't know anything about. Or maybe, again, it could be weird sexual perversions. I'm sorry, it cracks me up. That the root of sexual perversions comes from this nakshatra. So I don't know. I'm waiting for the comments in the comment section, or maybe email me in private if you know about people who have weird sexual perversions. And they have this nakshatra that is very prominently placed. But I think it's like, I think this is really how, also having this nakshatra myself, very prominently placed, also in my divisional charts as well, it's quite influential. And I think that's the reason, speaking from my own experience, is that I am one of those rare specimens that is still savagely honest a lot of the times. Basically, the best case scenario, I will just shut up rather than lie. But I have definitely learned to be more cautious in public, especially in the past years or so. And this is what I can gather, that is just, especially as a woman, it's like, you have to learn to hide who you really are in order to be accepted in society. And I think that's a lot of where the two-facedness comes from. But like I said, because of their anger issues and their painful experiences, especially if they stem all the way in childhood, it can turn malignant to the point where these people can be spies or like whatever. They can, I'm going to get to some examples actually after I finish this rant. About examples of characters in movies and television that are very Purva Bhadrapada dominant, and often they revolve around being spies, hitmen, people who conceal an entirely different identity, etc., etc., and they're often played by actors who have a strong Purva Bhadrapada influence. That's another thing. Yeah, and I think this is where it comes from. It comes from the fact that if they are abused, or if they build a resentment, frustration. Another thing is that this is also one of the nakshatras that are most angry, probably, together with Ardra and Kritika, Jyeshta maybe as well, but I would say Ardra. I think Ardra is probably the only one that is potentially angrier than Purva Bhadrapada. It depends, though. But their anger, I would say with Ardra, the anger is much more likely to come from trauma and hurt feelings or buried emotions. With Purva Bhadrapada, it's much more likely to come from, well, to some extent also buried emotions, but in a different way. It's more like anger and aggression and also frustration, because this nakshatra has a very strong desire to expand constantly. And the more people create obstacles for them, whether it's, obstacles in their progress, in, again, could be disrespect, etc., the more resentment they build, the more anger they build. So, and all of that can reach a breaking point. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say also. And the bipolar part also, this nakshatra, sometimes the two-faced man can refer to, literally a person who is sad, has a side that is sad. But all of these things really go hand in hand, because if a person is forced to become inauthentic in order to survive in the world, it's going to create pressures within them. It's going to create misery, feeling misunderstood, feeling alone, and all that stuff. So you can imagine how that can lead to depression and even potentially becoming bipolar if you repress a lot of intense emotions for long periods of time. Let's not forget that anger and depression are basically two sides of the same coin. Depression, most of the cases of depression are basically coming from repressed anger. And I also, as I was doing research for celebrities or famous people who have prominent placements in this nakshatra, I came across Catherine Zeta-Jones, who had a very, as far as I read, public experience with bipolar disorder, in the sense that I think she was committed or something to an institution for a while. Whatever. Yeah, I digress. So, professions associated with this nakshatra. This was a long parenthesis. So, professions associated with Purva Bhadrapada are business and or administration. Or, so basically they could be running their own business or having their own source of income, or they could be into business administration. They could be into research work, statisticians, astrologers, priests, or spiritual leaders, ascetics. Also, speaking of priests, I heard that the guy who founded Scientology also was prominent in Purva Bhadrapada. And Aleister Crowley, who also started some kind of a religious movement in the early 20th century, the Thelema, which is, again, some kind of a weird religious Wiccan thing that was centered around, the idea that people's job is to fulfill their desires or whatever. So, yes, this nakshatra is very commonly, it's also a Brahmin caste, so it's a priestly caste, also the same as Kritika, and both of them are associated to the element of fire, which is a purifying force. and asceticism. Also, they can be ascetics. So these can be people like literally can be shut off from the rest of the world. Also, of course, any profession connected to death and dealing with death, like morticians, undertakers, cemetery keeper, coffin maker. What do you call those? Autopsy doctors, like Dr. G, something like that. Surgeons, psychiatrists, revolutionaries and radicals. I found it funny that I found this in some source that this was mentioned as a profession. Authors, especially of horror or mystery stories, weapon makers, leather industry, homicide investigators, that's another thing. Yeah, anything to do with death, like I said. Metal industry, professions involving fire, toxic substances, pharmacy or chemistry jobs, which crack me up because, I'm going to get to this in the examples. Environmental activists, entertainment industry, police and defense jobs. Right, so the examples that I was talking about, I am going to apologize to the other nakshatras because the other nakshatras, I don't have as much information for them as I do for this nakshatra. But again, the reason I think there is a lot more information, a lot more examples for this nakshatra is because this nakshatra is much more present on the collective subconscious than probably any other nakshatra right now and for the past several decades. And I'm namely referring to examples of, like I said, TV shows, movies that have a lot of Purva Bhadrapada themes. And I wanted to mention some nakshatras, some examples that I was actually saving to make a separate video, more in depth, but I figured I should just share at least part of what I have found so far, because I thought it would be interesting, and by the time, it's going to be a while until I get to the point of making more detailed videos for each nakshatra separately. And I wanted to mention some examples that I noticed in movies and TV series of themes that are very Purva Bhadrapada, and also that ironically are played by actors that are very strongly Purva Bhadrapada. And the first one that I can think of from recent years is the TV series Breaking Bad. Like other people have, I also have seen this mentioned by other astrologers, that Breaking Bad is probably a great example of not just Purva Bhadrapada themes, but actually most of the actors that are involved in that series, including the producer, the writer, has prominent Purva Bhadrapada placements. And the whole theme of Breaking Bad is basically a guy who becomes, basically is frustrated, which is the theme of anger that I was talking about. So he feels he is a chemistry teacher who is passionate about his field, but he feels very disrespected. He doesn't make a lot of money. The show starts out with him basically feeling ignored, feeling unappreciated, both at work and in his family. He has to work 2 jobs because he doesn't make enough money from his teaching chemistry job, and he also works, I think, at a washing something laundry service place, and I was gonna say car wash or something. I think it was a laundry service place. Yeah, so he was working 2 jobs, barely makes it ends meet. On top of which his, not so much his wife, but his brother-in-law emasculates him. His brother-in-law works with the police, the, I think, the anti-drug section of the police or something like that. I think it's called DEA in the US. And basically his brother-in-law is this typical macho character and who pulls the main character's leg all the time and makes him feel emasculated. And on top of that, he has to deal with the fact that his ex-girlfriend from his youth and her boyfriend that he knew, who was a co-worker of theirs when they were dating, became filthy rich by using the ideas that this guy, the main protagonist, Walter, had given them or something like that. So he had all these frustrations about how he was unappreciated, and the cherry on top was him being diagnosed with cancer and not having enough money to pay for treatment. And he was faced with the situation which he found very humiliating, which is another important Purva Bhadrapada theme, because they're very prideful and they don't like to lower their heads and accept defeat or to beg for something. And so he's faced with this really not pleasant situation of having to go to his ex-girlfriend and potentially ask for money for the treatment. And his wife was pushing him forward to carry, to go on with this plan. And then he realizes by watching some TV show that that actually his brother-in-law had showed him that basically drug dealers are making a lot of money. And then he gets this really bad idea. Well, in retrospect, really, by the end of the series, you realize that how much of a bad idea it was. But he gets this idea of basically starting to make drugs for a living. And the whole show is how he becomes further entangled and becomes addicted to this lifestyle that he finds out he, is pretty good at, and basically finds all of the respect that he always felt that he lacked in his family system and at work. And all of a sudden he gets that sense of power, that sense of freedom. And by the end of the show, spoiler alert, says something along the lines of like, I did this for me. He was telling his wife that, I did this for me because it made me feel alive and I was good at it and all this stuff. So you basically get the feeling that he just felt free, and a lot of what he did was just for enjoyment and for having power and just because he could, basically. But yeah, mainly it was about the freedom that he got from this endeavor, basically. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And also another interesting thing to realize about this show is that, like I said, all of the main characters, I think, the character who played his wife had moon in Purva Bhadrapada. And he himself, I think his name is Bryan Cranston, has sun in Purva Bhadrapada. I think his sister-in-law had sun in Purva Bhadrapada. The guy who played Gus Fring, who was another established drug lord in the series, also has some prominent Purva Bhadrapada, I think moon or sun. And Jesse, his partner, had ascendant in Purva Bhadrapada. So basically, almost all of the main characters have some placement in Purva Bhadrapada in that series, and which is so fascinating, and it's so telling how, astrology works, that basically the right people are drawn to the right archetype, so to speak. So this was one example that I can think of. Another example that is equally telling, I think, is the character of Donald Draper in the series Mad Men. I've seen this one a while ago. I think it was around 2010 when it started. And again, spoiler alert, the main theme of the movie is basically this guy who I think he gets sent to war during World War II, and he comes from this really bad environment, really dirt poor. I think he grows up in a brothel, and really traumatic childhood, doesn't even know his mother, I think, or his mother died. I don't remember exactly, but there was something about his mother. I think he was raised by relatives and he didn't know his mother. He didn't know his father. There were some issues of, being exposed, obviously growing up in a brothel, being exposed to things that he shouldn't have been exposed to from a very young age. And then he gets sent to war and sees one of his comrades getting killed in a way that left him unrecognizable, and all of a sudden gets the idea of taking this guy's identity and basically assumes this guy's identity, gives himself a different name so that he no longer ever has to see his family again, basically, and basically reinvents himself, taking on a completely new personality and persona and pretending to be something he's not. And basically the whole series is about how his entire life he has to deal with the pressures and the psychological, basically, yeah, drama and torture and all the stuff associated with having to hide this level of a secret and basically living a double life, basically. Not double, yeah, in many ways, double life. Also, it's funny because in this situation, the guy is also portrayed as having an issue with being a womanizer, not being capable of being faithful to his wife, which kind of sounds like a lot of Purva Bhadrapada. Well, sounds like someone who had a traumatic childhood in the first place, but also potentially someone who has a lot of Purva Bhadrapada energy, because, well, it's that desire to find stability through the feminine energy. And yeah, that's another example that I can think of. And also by the end of this show, which is very cool, he has a breakdown. He has a breakdown where he basically tells everyone who he really is. I mean, his wife finds out and files for divorce, and after that he tells his partner in the firm and everything. And I think by the end of the movie, he either loses everything, or I don't remember, by the end of the series, I mean, he loses everything and I don't know, loses his partners and everything. And the show ends with him going to some kind of a retreat, and he's doing yoga and something like that in this really like spiritual sort of energy, which again is a very Purva Bhadrapada theme. Basically, after the whole world collapses and you have to face the truth about yourself and who you really are, you start to turn to spirituality and look for answers. And also, the actor has Sun in Purva Bhadrapada. I think his name is John Hamm. Pretty sure that I have added him as an example on the list of famous people in this video. Another example is Villanelle in Killing Eve. I would say that this is a more complicated situation because the actress has Mars in Ardra, and the actress, I think Sandra Oh, who plays her love interest, has Moon in Ardra, which I noticed that, I mean, when I looked at their charts, it's like, oh, okay, that's why they have such good chemistry. It makes sense, especially if you watch my video on the Moon-Mars aspects in synastry, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. And of course, this is about actors, but in order for them to embody these characters convincingly, they also have to have some chemistry, and they also have to be able to embody these energies convincingly themselves. So, and yes, Jodie Comer, the actress who plays Villanelle, has Sun in Purva Bhadrapada, Mars in Ardra, which no doubt makes her very convincing at playing a serial killer. Also has Moon in Swati, if I remember correctly, which is also a nakshatra that is ruled by Rahu, just like Ardra. I won't get into Ardra right now, but already the fact that she has Sun in Purva Bhadrapada makes her very appropriate for this role of playing basically a hired assassin. And similarly to a lot of, the rest of the examples that I mentioned so far, this character also grows up in a bad environment. You find out at some point in the series that she was actually abandoned at an orphanage, and there are also hints that she has had a very traumatic upbringing, that she was raised to be a stone-cold killer. And the whole theme of the movie is how this person, this woman, is so good at having this basically double identity where she can walk around in public and come across as just an average citizen and look very innocent, and then flip from, laid back and casual and even at times childlike and funny to becoming a stone cold killer within a second. So I think it's a very Purva Bhadrapada and also Ardra themed sort of show. I won't get into the Ardra themes for now, maybe, to be continued in a future video. When I talk about Ardra, maybe. But yes, I think this is also very Purva Bhadrapada themed. The Killing Eve show. Also, there are actors that play repeated roles that are Purva Bhadrapada themed, like Robert De Niro, who is more Moon in Purva Bhadrapada, and of course has played a lot of gangsters. A lot of, yeah, gangsters, mafia members, you name it. Even played the monster Frankenstein in that movie in the 90s, which was very fitting. And he also has Jupiter in Ardra, if I remember correctly, which makes him very good for the Frankenstein role. Again, to be continued in a future video where I talk more in depth about Ardra. Then there is Rachel Weisz, who also has played a lot of roles that are very Purva Bhadrapada themed, like, for instance, the role in The Mummy, where she deals with, you know, the supernatural. She's like this bookish librarian person who is kind of a nerd, but at the same time is, you know, deals with spirits and whatever. So it's like death, spirits, all that stuff, very Purva Bhadrapada. Then she also played, the role that she played more recently in The Favorite, I thought was very Purva Bhadrapada. Again, she plays this woman who is the lover of the queen, a lesbian, already by virtue of having this role, quote unquote. It's a two-faced sort of position where she has to keep appearances. I think she's married. She's a lady of high society who is married, but at the same time is the queen's lover. And she also plays this very kind of masculine, tough, even ruthless person who is also idealistic and basically does everything she does out of loyalty for the queen and for her country. I also thought that was also very Purva Bhadrapada. And on top of that, she also played a role, I think it was called My Cousin Rachel. I haven't read the book. I heard that it's based on Daphne du Maurier's novel, but if you see that movie, it is so fitting for a woman who has Purva Bhadrapada energy, especially how I bet that many of these women have had to live and the themes that they have had to deal with for probably most of human history, especially being born in more, quote, traditionalist societies where they're not allowed to be themselves. Oftentimes they're scapegoated. That's what happens, and this is what to a large extent happens to this character in the movie, because she is just very unusual and threatens everyone with her independence. And very shortly, the story of the movie is basically how she is the widow. Already there's a death theme because she is presented as the widow of the cousin of this guy that she meets for the first time in England, and the cousin falls in love with her. And basically the story is all about how the cousin wants to marry her, but she is resistant to the idea, and then the cousin gives her a large sum of inheritance because she was the widow of his cousin, and she decides to basically leave with the money or something like that. And I don't know, basically the story of the movie is almost that she gets demonized and scapegoated by people who try to turn the head of this cousin against her, and it ends rather tragically. But this is unfortunately a theme that is common for women who have strong Purva Bhadrapada energy. Again, like I said, especially in more traditionalist societies, that because people don't understand them, they tend to mistrust them or they feel threatened by them. Oftentimes by virtue of them really not doing anything wrong, just being authentic, they attract unwanted attention or they attract hatred even. And yes, Rachel Weisz also has Sun in Purva Bhadrapada, which makes her quite fitted to playing these kinds of roles. And yet another actress that I can think of is Catherine Zeta-Jones, who has played repeated roles that, again, seemed quite Purva Bhadrapada themed. She played, I think, Griselda, what's her name? Griselda, I think, or Imelda, I don't remember. Blanco, who was like the first woman drug lord. Typical. I think also she played a woman who was really feisty and capable of fighting in The Mask of Zorro. She also played a spy, I think, in a movie with Sean Connery ages ago. She played a bunch of roles that are very much Purva Bhadrapada themed. She also played a gold digger, but a really ruthless one in a comedy called Intolerable Cruelty. Also, she played a woman who was a murderer in Chicago who killed her husband and then tried to become famous by making use of the publicity around her murder. So, yeah, a lot of really fitting Purva Bhadrapada themed roles. I'm pretty sure that there are really many of them. Oh, and yes, another one that I wanted to mention that is more relatively recent is The Raised by Wolves, which is a TV series produced by, I think, Ridley Scott, who also did or directed the Alien series and a bunch of other sci-fi movies. But yes, the Raised by Wolves is also, I think, very Purva Bhadrapada theme because it's all about religion. It's basically biblical in many, through all its symbolisms. It's basically the story of the Garden of Eden and all that stuff. But what I really found interesting is that there is a character called the Necromancer, or as it is called in the series, the Mother, which is basically an android or a robot that can fly through the air in a T-pose, which looks very much similar to Aja Ekapat, the deity associated to Purva Bhadrapada. And also this necromancer, also the name necromancer, very, very Purva Bhadrapada themed. And it's basically a weapon that has great powers, and it's about some kind of a sci-fi post-apocalyptic world where there was a great war between the atheists and the believers who were Mithraic. The whole story was that the Mithraic won, I think, that was the story by the end, by using these necromancers that were actually passed down by a higher power that nobody really understood. So anyway, there's like all these themes about, consciousness and evolution and all this. And right, this is something that I wanted to mention. Actually, I should have mentioned in the general description, is that Purva Bhadrapada, basically in its highest expression, is about changing evolution almost. So they're like the next stage in evolution. Like they're supposed to bring people to a higher level of understanding, which, is seen in a lot of these movies as well. But in their best expression, this is also why, Marie Curie has had moon in Purva Bhadrapada, Einstein had sun in Purva Bhadrapada. So a lot of people who basically had really hot, breakthrough ideas and contributions were Purva Bhadrapada, as well as people who, fought for social reform and justice and just changing the general mentalities of society about issues surrounding human rights and so forth. Like, I think Martin Luther King also had a prominent Purva Bhadrapada energy. So yeah, this is about evolution. So back to Raised by Wolves. This necromancer thing also had the ability to change faces, to fly through the air in a T-pose. Was very vicious, very fierce in protecting the people that it was built to protect. And I would say, again, very much Purva Bhadrapada themed. And also the actress who plays the main character of Mother is also someone who has, I think, Venus in Purva Bhadrapada, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of themes in a lot of movies, and I think it's the reason why there are so many examples about this nakshatra. And I haven't seen nearly as many with other nakshatras, but I'm sure there are. If you dig hard enough, I'm sure that there are themes surrounded to every nakshatra. But Purva Bhadrapada is probably the richest in examples because it's just probably so present on the collective subconscious, and it's so actual. Everything about it is themes that are on everyone's mind right now. So yes, thank you for listening. This has been a very, 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 very long recording, and I hope that you will find it useful. And once again, if you have managed to listen to the whole thing, can I just thank you very much? You deserve an award of patience. And of course, please comment in the comment section with anything you liked, anything you didn't like, what you would want to see different in the future or what you want to see more of in the future. Yes, and if you have liked it, please do not forget to like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. Please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you. I also wanted to add a few things that I forgot to talk about, namely about all Jupiter-ruled nakshatras in general. As I have mentioned also with the Mars-ruled nakshatras, and I should have mentioned, I think, for all nakshatras, the reason I also emphasized the animal yonis is because I really think there is something to be gained from analyzing that particular animal that pertains to a nakshatra. And consider the fact that when you think of people who have these nakshatras prominently placed, you're going to see a similarity in characteristics when it comes to their unconscious nature that is similar to the animal. And of course, it's not going to be literal. Of course, you have to use your intuition a little bit. It's not like people who have placements in Punarvasu are going to be drinking milk from a bowl because their animal yoni is a cat. You know what I mean? But you're going to see similarities. Like, for instance, first of all, the fact that all of these three nakshatras are depicted by felines, right? Punarvasu is the female cat. Vishakha is the male tiger, and Purva Bhadrapada is the male lion. Already kind of gives you a hint that these people are going to be most likely above average good looking. So if you are a person who has your partner dispositors in one of these nakshatras, especially with respect to Purva Bhadrapada, I have heard that this is a nakshatra that probably also because of the connection to Nagas and the similarity to Ashlesha, which I have mentioned, it makes them, above average in sex appeal and attractiveness, and also makes them not care too much about their attractiveness. Especially with the women of this nakshatra, you're going to see that these are rarely going to be women who base their self-esteem or their confidence on their appearance or how other people feel about their appearance. Even when they are good looking, which a lot of them are, they may care about their appearance as an instrument, right? Especially if they are in show business or something, but they will not derive their confidence from that, from compliments, because this is a really, again, masculine energy. The Purva Bhadrapada energy is very masculine, meaning it's very restless. The women, similarly to the men, are constantly going to be driven to succeed something or to create something in the world around them. Often they have a strong sense of mission, especially the ones who manage to find a healthy outlet for their energy. They're going to have, a strong sense of mission, of accomplishing something in the world, some vision that they have, whether it's in art, science, or whatever it is. So because of this, they're not going to care so much about physical appearance. They're going to derive their sense of identity and self-confidence more from what they want to achieve, their creativity, their ideas, whatever it may be, rather than, compliments and such. So that's something I wanted to say. But also with respect to, so aside from physical appearance, Vishakha as well and Punarvasu as well, they can be above average good looking. With Vishakha and Purva Bhadrapada, you can expect these to be pretty robust looking as well. Of course, it depends on what else is happening there. As usual, I always mention this as a disclaimer. You have to look at the full horoscope. But I would say, especially if you have these nakshatras connected to the ascendant, so if you have the ascendant in one of these nakshatras, or the person, if you have the ascendant or the ruler of the ascendant, the ruler of the first house falls in one of these nakshatras, then whether you look at the D1 or the D9 chart, that's also important. You have to look at both of these charts. And as usual, the D9 chart is going to be especially useful in showing how you're going to develop physically even after the age of 35. So they will especially influence your physical appearance if they are connected somehow to the ascendant or to Mars. If they are connected to the second house, let's say, they're going to influence the facial features of a person. So you might have just characteristics of the face that match a particular nakshatra. Let's say you have the second house lord in Purva Bhadrapada. Maybe you're going to have some features that are even resembling the lion. And this is another thing that if you look at the famous examples that I have found for these nakshatras, especially the ones who have moon or ascendant in Purva Bhadrapada, to a lesser extent the other planets, they will have certain characteristics. Like usually what I have seen is with Punarvasu, they tend to be the gentle ones, so they won't have as much of an intensity or aggressiveness about them, but they will have really pleasant features, really pretty features. The women especially can look really feminine, at least look. The energy still is pretty masculine in the sense that it will lack the aggressiveness of the other nakshatras, but it will be masculine in the sense that they still have a strong sense of mission and dedication towards their visions and goals and all that. With Vishakha, you're especially going to see people who are very muscular, who care a lot about their physical fitness, I would say, to some extent also with Purva Bhadrapada, but with Purva Bhadrapada, there's a lot more variation happening from one individual to another. You really have to see you really have to see what else is happening in the person's chart to determine this. But with both Purva Bhadrapada and Vishakha, you can see a kind of like toughness about them. Usually, whether it's strictly physical, like referring to their physique, or sometimes their facial features and expressions. With Vishakha, they actually look more, I would say, more aggressive. I would say on average, they seem like people who are like, they will be ready to jump at a fight for any second. Usually, especially the men, but sometimes even the women, they have this toughness about them. I would say with Purva Bhadrapada, it's more about the intensity that comes from their expressions, especially the eyes. What I have noticed with Purva Bhadrapada is that often they have really intense eyes, like intense stares, and or they can have very soulful eyes, or sometimes they will switch from, soulful to intense or angry pretty quickly. Another thing that actually is something that I've noticed with Purva Bhadrapadas, which I've also noticed with Ardras, and I mentioned that I kind of see them as cousins in some ways. The thing that I notice is that they can oftentimes, unless they really perfect the art of deception, which a lot of them do not, because they don't have any incentive to deceive a lot of the times. But if they're just in their natural state, they're very easy to read in the sense that they don't really have a poker face, so they can really have, also because they tend to have strong emotions, they can really show, their emotions can show on their face very easily. Which, is it's good for other people to take that into account, especially if they get angry and stuff. So this is something that I also wanted to say, but also with respect to the animal yonis, like when you think about the fact that Punarvasu is the only one that is basically a domestic cat, the other two are tiger and lion, which are wild animals. Also kind of goes hand in hand with the characteristics associated with Punarvasu, which is that and the rest of them, more specifically, the fact that Punarvasu is the most comfort-loving of these nakshatras, which is not to say that they don't also want to travel and explore, but they will care a lot more for, having the comfort, the safety nest. And also, even when they travel, they will desire a certain level of comfort because, it's the domestic cat. Also, they like things to be easy and simple, right? Which, again, kind of goes hand in hand with the domestic cat when you think about it. Also, the other two animals being also more specific about Vishakha and the differences between Vishakha and Purva Bhadrapada. Even though both of them are, yes, bigger cats, which shows the fact that they are adventurous, more bold, courageous, potentially also more aggressive and capable of damage. But also both of these nakshatras are associated with loving to travel and move around. I would say probably even more so for Purva Bhadrapada than Vishakha. But what is distinctive for Vishakha versus Purva Bhadrapada, for instance, is when you think about the tiger, I mentioned about the competitiveness that is inherent in these nakshatras, this nakshatra, Vishakha. When you think about the tiger, it's a very solitary animal, right? They only meet during mating seasons. And in between mating seasons, they live, there's usually one tiger on a vast territory in the wild. So they're very solitary animals. So that kind of goes hand in hand with the explaining the competitiveness of this nakshatra, right? When they see someone else that kind of threatens their position, they immediately react, usually, at least on an emotional level, of course. Whether they control their reactions or not depends on other factors, like how intelligent they are, how developed they are spiritually, and so on and so forth. But that's another difference. And then with Purva Bhadrapada, you can see that they're more laid back in general, unless someone threatens them. And actually, with Purva Bhadrapada, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me keep it one thing at a time. So, yes, the first thing that I wanted to say is, first of all, that lions are more social, right? So male lions, even when they don't have a pride, so if they find a pride, right, their job is to sit there and be the protector of the pride, right? So normally a lion pride is made of one male, or if there are younger males, they have to basically be submissive to the one male, but that's very uncommon. Usually there's one male and with several females, and the females usually do all the work. So the females are out there hunting and stuff, and the lion's main job is to mate and to be the protector, right? In case there's another lion trying to attack the pride or another animal. Sometimes the lion will help with the hunting and all that. But basically, kind of, again, goes hand in hand with the energy of this nakshatra, which is actually, and I probably should have mentioned this, that one of the highest expressions of Purva Bhadrapada is that they can become protectors, right? They generally, when they have someone or something to protect, like whether it's people or ideals or whatever, that's when they start to find their meaning and a productive life. So that is like the best thing they can do. And also, when a lion doesn't have a pride, they band together with other lions, or they hunt in pairs or in groups with other male lions, So they're more social, okay? So it kind of goes hand in hand with why this nakshatra is not as competitive as Vishakha, and it's more laid back and actually enjoys company, but can also make it on their own if they have to. Also, lions can also be solitary. And aside from that, what I wanted to say is that I was actually thinking about this while I was doing the research for these nakshatras, that when you think about it, crime families, which I mentioned that Purva Bhadrapada is probably the nakshatra that is most connected to, the underworld or, dark societies and crime, organized crime, stuff like that, people who basically live outside of the law. And this is basically the negative expression of this nakshatra, wanting freedom by any means necessary or at all costs, walking over dead bodies to get what they want, that kind of thing. And when you think about it, crime families, if you watch like The Godfather or any of these mafia movies, they're organized in similar fashion, right? There's usually the head of the family, quote unquote, which is like the alpha lion. And the lion, the head of the family, maintains his position either until he gets challenged by someone within the family or some other male from outside the family. It's usually a male, right? So it's very similar to the way that a lion pride is organized. And also the females are basically for taking care of the household, or like sometimes they're also allowed in working, but they don't have like the same status. They don't have the warrior status of the men. So that's like really similar to the lion pride, That's just something that I realized as a kind of, the irony of the situation. And the irony of the nakshatra and how accurate astrology is, it never ceases to amaze me. And aside from that, what I also wanted to mention, also with respect to Purva Bhadrapada, that I think I didn't mention and I should have, is because this nakshatra is connected to the deity that it is connected to, which is Aja Ekapad, which is the one-footed goat, or the one-footed unborn one. There is sometimes you see that people who have this nakshatra prominent have problems with their feet. So like they could go through periods in their lives where for one reason or another, maybe they have an accident or some kind of condition or something, and they have to lean more on one foot, or sometimes they're limping or something. Of course, for this, you would also have to look at transits and dashas and antardashas and all that. But it is a potential outcome, and I have seen it. I've seen this even in my own life, because I have mentioned that this nakshatra is pretty prominent in my horoscope as well. And yeah, I have had some mild problems like that. I've also seen it with other people. And also because of the connection to the feet, this is a nakshatra that can be connected to dancing. So if you see other placements in the chart that show an interest in athleticism or, you know, physical stuff, physical activity, sports, and so on, this can definitely show a tendency for a person to become a dancer. And I was thinking about this when I found the examples, because two of the famous actresses, namely Rita Hayworth and Catherine Zeta-Jones, started out as dancers, as far as I know. Or like Catherine Zeta-Jones was a dancer and an actress at the same time, I think. But Rita Hayworth really started out, I think, early on in her artistic career. She was actually a dancer, and then she became an actress. And both of them have moon in Purva Bhadrapada. And also Michael Jackson. I don't think I have posted his picture up among the other examples, but as far as I remember, I'm pretty sure that he has either moon or ascendant or some prominent placement in Purva Bhadrapada. And of course, he was also, again, largely known because of his dance moves. And aside from that, let me think, what else did I want to say? Also, something that I think I should have mentioned is that unlike Ketu, so I did mention that this nakshatra can sometimes be similar to Ketu in energy, in the sense that people who have prominent Purva Bhadrapada, much like the people who are very Ketuvian, will care a lot about spirituality, about well, everything that is supernatural. Even with Purva Bhadrapada, you can definitely see a tendency to think about aliens, UFOs, stuff like that. Anything that is paranormal activity, expect these people to care about it. But aside from that, what is different for, or what is distinct for Purva Bhadrapada by comparison to Ketuvians, is that they can actually really take it to the dark side. In fact, they will be much more tempted to get into things like, you know, conjurings, maybe attracted to rituals, dark magic, stuff like that. Really, if they are not spiritually developed, they can go for things that just offer them, let's say, quick results, you know, like conjuring things just to get power or to get freedom or whatever it is that they want. So that is a danger that is more strong in this nakshatra than it is for the Ketu dominant. You know, using the supernatural to their for materialism, basically. That's what an underdeveloped Purva Bhadrapada would do. So that is one thing. And I also wanted to say something else. Yeah, so another thing that I wanted to say with respect to examples is, I thought about, after I talked about the examples that I found with respect to Purva Bhadrapada, and I'm sure that there are plenty of examples. There are also two singers that I did mention as examples on the screen, which are Billie Eilish and Grimes. Grimes, even her name suggests the influence of Purva Bhadrapada, and that's also something that I wanted to say, right? I was going to say, before I get to the examples, is that Purva Bhadrapada, unlike Ketuvians, can actually really go into the direction of becoming really gross, like in the negative expression. And you can see this a lot when you see artists, and artists, like, in their art, no matter what their art form is, they can use images that are kind of shocking sometimes, or like depict a lot of gory stuff, a lot of violence. Like, I can think about the scene in Breaking Bad, if you have seen it, where they put, like, they're trying to get rid of a body and dissolve it in a bathtub with, I think, sulfuric acid or something. and the body just eats through the floor and it falls down into and you can just see blood splattered everywhere. So that's the kind of thing, or the another scene that I can think about that is similar, but I don't know if it's about Purva Bhadrapada, is the scene from The Shining. So again, maybe there's something to be said. Maybe they're similar to Ketu in that sense, but because I did mention Stephen King is very Ketuvian, I'm not sure if he has any Purva Bhadrapada energy. But yes, you would expect to see stuff like this, really dark, gory stuff, basically, in the art of Purva Bhadrapada. Grimes, like I was going to mention, Grimes, even her name is very much Purva Bhadrapada inspired. She also, and another thing that you're going to see in both of Grimes's music videos and lyrics, and also in Billie Eilish's music videos, is this focus on angels. And that's something that I've seen a lot, with Purva Bhadrapadas, they really like images of, angels or things with wings. Which again kind of leads me to think of, the Pegasus energy to some extent. I'm pretty sure Billie Eilish had some video, I don't remember what the song was, where she plays basically a fallen angel or something like that. Then Grimes also has a video for the song called Flesh Without Blood, where she plays an angel that is basically dark and, uses voodoo dolls to control humans or something like that. The lyrics are also pretty creepy and suggestive. Also talking about, the dark side, usually things that have to do with aggression, sometimes even speaking of violence in their lyrics. I have seen that. I mean, Billie Eilish has a song called Bad Guy, and then she has a song called Bury a Friend or something like that. Grimes also has a bunch of songs that are, quite dark and suggestive, and also very futuristic in their style and lyrics and everything. Unusual combinations. Yes, and this is something that I think didn't mention, because to a large extent it was obvious to me, at least, that, or I kind of inferred it through other things that I mentioned about them, is that these people, if they have prominent Purva Bhadrapada energy, they can be very weird. Really, they just have a style of their own. They like things that are not mainstream, and it's not because necessarily they're trying to shock or because they're trying to get attention. Sometimes it could be that, but most of the times it's just them following their preferences. Finding different weird combinations, especially if you look at artists and stuff, they will mix different genres, or have an interest in things that are very different, or in general they are very difficult to read, and not necessarily difficult. Yeah, I would say actually yes, they are difficult to read. Even though on the surface they might show their emotions very clearly when they do have emotions, they overall as people, they're not easy to understand. And that's because they just have a lot of paradoxical sides that are mixing together in different ways that people don't expect. And another thing that I also wanted to mention is, and you probably have noticed this with the examples on the screen, you definitely are going to see this nakshatra, I would say more than average, being connected to tattoos. And I think a lot of that also has to do with the sub-influence of Rahu, especially in the Aquarius segment, but not only. But even if it's not from Rahu, I would say it's because of this nakshatra's connections to spirituality. And if you read into tattooing, it started as a spiritual practice. In most cultures, tattoos had some kind of a spiritual meaning, and that's where I think it comes from, this interest, this connection between Purva Bhadrapada and an interest for getting tattoos. But I have seen this with quite a few natives, aside from celebrities and so forth. Okay, so this is pretty much what I wanted to add. And once again, if you have made it this far, thank you so much for listening. And also, of course, if you like the video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell, and to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. Please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you.